I could do that. Well, if I do that, that kind of breaking of the voice signals I'm not quite sure I can do it. And that breaking of the voice used in another context gives us quite a different feeling in terms of how the communication is going on. When the politician says, and I know you'll all vote for me because I have your interest at heart, and only your interest at heart, that's supposed to make us realize that the politician is deeply concerned about us emotionally. Whether it comes off or not, I leave up to you. In other words, these particular kinds of things that go over quite a stretch, again, in vocalizations, are what we call vocal characterizers. Now, as we narrow down in terms of the time, we find that in our vocal qualifiers, the next one of our vocalizations here, that we can actually take 3 particular levels of phenomena: intensity or loudness, pitch, and duration. And that we can actually measure from a baseline, and which has been established in the communication situation, 1 degree of overloudness, 2 degrees of overloudness, 3 degrees of overloudness. For instance, if I say, I want you to hear this, I've actually put 1 degree of overloudness from the baseline of the conversational tone I'm using talking to you right now. If I said, I want you to hear this, that would be 2 degrees of overloudness. And if I said, I want you to hear this, that would be 3 degrees of overloudness. In the same way with oversoftness. And pitch works the same way. Over high and over low pitch to 3 degrees, very easily measured in terms of the baseline that has been established. By the same token, this matter of duration, drawl. For instance, if I say something like, he saw my hand, there's no drawl. But if I say he saw my hand, that's not drawl. If I say he saw my hand, plus drawl. He saw my hand, double plus drawl. And I can clip the same way. For instance, I can say, yeah, that's drawl. But if I say, yeah, that's double plus clipping. Yeah, you're exactly right. That's the word yeah or yes said with double plus clipping. In other words, then, I find that I can quite accurately measure these particular kinds of phenomena of loudness and of pitch and of duration, 3 degrees of them from a baseline, and that these particular kinds of things stretch over now not more than about 4 words. Then I have my last line of vocalizations, my vocal segregates. Now, the vocal segregates are actually single events that I can pull out of the whole business of paralanguage. For instance, this one here, this E turned around backwards, stands for the sound you hear when people say yeah, and so on. This is This is the thing you hear in that little glottal catch, and this is the thing you hear in that H-like sound. This is actual silence. These are inspiration and expiration. There are various kinds of clicks, like things like that. Now, also, these vocal segregates, which can exist, so to speak, by themselves, as this one of silence can, this one here, which is actual silence, stopping talking, cessation of phonation, we call it. We stop talking entirely for a split second or a little more. These things now, however, can be put together into packages. So I can get ha, or ha, with half nasalization, and with full nasalization. That M stands for closed lip nasalization. Then notice I can put these things into packages, not only with themselves, but with language. So I get such a thing as this one here with an intonation pattern on it. That says, comes down to pitch 1, double cross juncture, And this would say, pardon me, there it is. And over here I can put vocal qualifiers even on them. These others are typical of the same kind of thing. For instance, here I can say, with plus drawl on it, like that, you see. This shows me then that in this particular kind of area that we're examining, we can be extremely accurate in picking out the events and seeing how the events structure together. Now again, this business of the meaning. How much meaning do we have here in this kind of thing? Do any one of these things mean one thing? No. The said means something different from the said without that drawl. Meaning, again, here in para is a matter of pattern with pattern. The paralanguage isn't the whole thing. Kinesics now. How about this business of kinesics? Well, in kinesics, where we're dealing with bodily motion, again, the kinds of events that we can pull out of context, these events are not single events that have meaning in and of themselves. They exist actually only, again, in terms of pattern. So, for instance, if I should wink my eye at you, like that, what would that mean? Well, I can tell you this. It would mean much more, if you will, if you saw it in its real context, or say a real context where I would use it, say something like that. Or notice my head's come down, my eyebrows have gone up, my lip has gone up. That's a knowing wink, shall we say. In other words, the wink, the little atomistic part of this business, that doesn't carry meaning. Meaning comes from the whole environment in which we see it. And obviously, kinesics is not the whole of communication any more than language is, or paralanguage is. Kinesics obviously has to go along with all of the other two. Now, kinesics, however, not only is a series of these kinds of packages, and they're what we call kinemorphic constructions. They're composed of little units we call kinds. We even have motion qualifiers. Just as we have voice qualifiers, we have motion qualifiers. But the important point about kinesics that I want to bring out right now is that at times we have got to make some kind of bodily motion when we talk. It is impossible for us to say certain kinds of sentences without actually using kinesics. For instance, let me give you an example. Try to ask a simple question like this one. Really? Just one word. Really? Notice what I've done. In order to show the person I'm really interested, I have leaned forward. Notice what happens to my eyes. You see how they blink? And my eyebrows have gone up. And I, along with that intonation pattern with the double bar juncture, I give you this digging motion. You see, I'm really digging it. Really? Well, this is an obvious use of it. Now, how about, though, what we call the typical kinesic marker, or another typical kinesic marker, the one that I have to use when I even make a simple sentence, say a simple sentence like John gave Bill money. I know you couldn't see it then, but when I said John gave Bill money, just before I said money, up went my eyebrow. I have got to do something with my body when I say a sentence like that before I get to money. Now, I can either say John gave Bill money, you see I can do it that way, or I can say John gave Bill money. I can even move my hand or my foot. John gave Bill money. My foot or my leg. In other words, kinesics has to be used at certain times. We can't escape it. And this whole matter, then, of how these things fit together, what we call now congruence. If everything fits as we expect, we have what we call congruence, and the interaction goes along swimmingly. But if any one part of the business doesn't, then we have a problem. In other words, this matter of congruence, again, I think can be best understood if we return now again to our package. And here in our package, here is language, here's paralanguage, and here's kinesics. If anything goes wrong or seems to be out of balance, immediately something has happened. I get a jar. For instance, if I should say to you, good morning, that kind of kinesics makes perfect sense. But if I should say to you, good morning, with that kind of kinesics and all that, obviously there is a distinct incongruence here. The message that the words say is not in keeping with the way I have expected that kind of message to be used in terms of my past cultural experience. And that kind of incongruence then leads me to a very, very systematic way of taking apart what really goes on in communication and clocking what is congruent and what is not congruent. In other words, when I find my incongruences in terms of my patterning of all the systems, then one thing I know has happened. New information has been injected into the communication situation, and I'd better look right there, because something that is incongruent has taken place. And that tells me new information, unexpected information has taken place. Then the linguist can't say anything about what meaning really means, as you will see, unless he is going to understand that structure comes first. We're not interpreting this particular business. What we're doing is simply saying, here is where you look for real information, because there's something incongruent here. Meaning can be found not in any one part, but in the totality of the patterning. And this kind of thing, this kind of way of looking at communication makes us aware of ourselves. And when we become aware of ourselves and how we are relating to others in our culture, when we really learn to see and hear, I think we've gone a long way toward understanding the differences between ourselves and other people. And I know of nothing more important in this divided and shrinking world today than to understand ourselves and understand the differences between ourselves and other people. The meaning of interaction can come from these kinds of studies. Now, in this series of programs, we have endeavored to show you something about communication, but particularly, of course, about language. We have pulled language out of the package, and we have talked about language and writing, about how linguistics can help in the teaching of a foreign language. We've seen how it can be applied to teaching of reading. We've seen something about English grammar, about correctness. We've talked about primitive languages, are there any? We've seen the history of our own language family, the history of English and its spread, and we have also seen how patterning works at every level. There's one thing I hope you